This is Politically Incorrect, episode 5, here with Gloria again.
Again.
We're going to be talking about patriotism. Today's July 4th. Happy Independence Day.
Happy birthday to my mom.
Happy birthday to Mama Melly as well, if she watches this. Feliz cumpleaños. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a couple of happy birthdays today.
there is. Actually, I didn't know there was a couple people that celebrate their birthdays on July 4th that I know. And I'm like, oh, snap.
Mm-hmm.
Malia Obama, his birthday's today as
I
well.
didn't know that. So last week, today was your birthday.
Last week was my birthday,
Mhm. And then this week,
my mama's
your
birthday.
mom's birthday, and then next week we'll share whose birthday is next week.
Yeah,
Okay.
3 weeks of celebrations.
Okay. So today we're talking about patriotism, and is patriotism reserved for white Republicans? And I ask that question because oftentimes whenever we talk about patriotism and loving our country, it seems as if the only way that that is expressed and appreciated on social media and on platforms, and even when I talk about the country, it's well, if you're not a Republican and it's not from a white person, then it's not appreciated. And so I just want us to have a conversation. Let's talk about patriotism. What does that look like? Can it look different for different people? What is the stereotype of what patriotism looks like, especially because
Yeah, that's a lot of questions you're throwing all at
yeah.
once.
No, no, we're gonna touch a little bit on all
Okay.
of that. But especially because we've been on the campaign and we've seen how people have
Mhm.
expressed their views of patriotism and loving the United States of America. So that's what we have for today.
Yeah, I think we talked about it when you were campaigning. How if you see someone flying an American flag in, one of the towns that we visit in Texas, I think automatically you assume that person is a Republican. Or if someone has an American flag on their car or anything like that, um, your mind automatically goes to Republican. And it could be white Republican. I would broaden it out, not just white people,
Okay.
um, but Republican. I don't think people associate patriots with Democrats, which is super sad to me.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think they've been better at messaging, and I think that people don't like criticism. And so if you criticize the country and say there's still racism going on, there's still some sort of bias, right? Like police brutality mainly affects black and brown people. Um, that kind of stuff, people like feel kind of weird about it. And so if you criticize it, then you can't love something. And I just don't think that's true. I think if you love something you should be able to critique it so it's better.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, there's a double standard there because I think, and maybe there's not a double standard there. Maybe I'm the one that's misreading how people operate in different spaces.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a double standard because if you now talk to, let's say, someone in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
and you tell them, hey, if you point out something that your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or girlfriend is doing wrong, does that mean that you don't like them? They would say, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I love them, but I want to point out something that they can get better at.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing for the United States. You can love your country while also saying, here are some of the flaws that we have, and this is what I would like for us to do to get better. Because loving something well, in my opinion, is wanting it to maximize its potential.
No, absolutely. And I think that we miss the mark as Democrats because we're quick to criticize, which we should, right? Like there's a lot of things that we need to do better in this country. But how often do you hear people being super vocal about loving this country
Sure.
and the freedoms that we have here? Right? Coming from being raised in Miami, born in Nicaragua, my mom having lived through communism, like we understand what not having freedoms is like, right? We understand what it's like to be put in prison because you disagree with someone. We understand what it's like if you're from an opposing party, them picking you up in the street and you disappear. My mom had many of her friends growing up get picked up in the street and she never saw them again
Mm.
because they disagreed with the government. And those are freedoms that we enjoy here. We can openly criticize people and say, that's not how you should do it. This is the way you should do it, blah, 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 blah. But like, those are freedoms that we should be celebrating as well.
For sure. And talk to me a little bit about the immigrant experience, being born in Nicaragua,
Mm-hmm.
coming here at an early age. Do you think that plays a role in how you view the United States of America versus maybe other people in the Democratic Party and how they view the country?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't think so. But there might be an appreciation that I have. I know I was 3 when I came. I think my mom may have more of that big gap. They used to have a little booklet where they would ration the food. And so every month a family would get a pound of rice. You would get X number of toilet paper, paper towels. I was a baby, so you would only get a gallon of milk. And so there were times that my mom had to buy milk on the black market because it wasn't part of the ration. Um, and so I think my mom appreciates this country, and she'll joke and she'll be like, "I love America. I love this country." And it's because of the things that she's able to experience here that she couldn't back
Mm-hmm.
home
Mm-hmm.
during that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and me being the son of immigrants, I was born and raised here in Texas, but my family's from Cameroon, and so there's an appreciation that I have because of hearing the experiences that my parents gone through, and just the opportunity that the United States was able to give my parents.
And if you work hard, my mom is such a huge proponent of in America, if you work hard, you're able to get by. We can have another conversation later about how harder it is on folks now, even though they're working harder than ever. But I think the principle still applies that if you work hard, you're able to get ahead. It may not be ahead as much as you want, but at least it's more than my mom could have back home. I have a cousin who has 3 degrees and still can't find a job. And it's
Mm-hmm.
because of ageism. She's older, and so people are discriminating. Imagine that in the United States, like you can sue someone, you can sue an employer for discriminating because of your age.
There are regulations in place to
Yeah,
make sure that.
exactly. And so there's a lot of things that are good in this country, and I think as Democrats, we should do a better job at celebrating all the wonderful things that this country has to have without like stopping the criticism. We should still criticize when things are bad.
Let's dig a little bit. Let's dig a little
Yeah.
bit there because me running as a Democratic candidate,
Mhm.
I know a lot of the pushback that I got online
Mhm.
when I talked about the United States of America. I even at some point was talking about the country, and someone went to a previous post and said, "Well, you're not American," and they clipped my dad talking to. Do you remember that when
Yeah,
they
yeah,
clipped
yeah.
my dad? Not even talking about anything relevant to the conversation we're having about the
No, I
country.
think your dad was just talking about
He
you.
was talking about me saying how happy he was that I was on the ballot, but they said that you're not an American. You're not a true Texan. It doesn't sound like this. So my question is, what does that sound like?
Yeah.
Does patriotism, does being an American sound a certain way?
Yeah, I think depending on and I hate painting people with a broad stroke,
Hmm.
but I think that unfortunately the people that have gravitated towards this MAGA movement are those types of people, right? That America has to look a certain way and it's a white version of America that they see.
Yeah.
So if you don't sound white, whatever that sounds like, um, because if you're from Boston and you're white, you sound different than if you're from Amarillo or from
Hmm.
another place, right? So I think that's the I think those people have gravitated towards one view of what Americans look like, and if it's outside of that, then you're not American.
And is there anything that you think can be done to shift that narrative in those people's minds, or you think that that's just the way that they're going to look at it?
I mean, unfortunately, I feel like those people with that mentality have existed forever.
Hmm.
What we can do more of is show what Americans look like. You, me, my um, mom, your dad. Like that is America.
Hmm.
It's not this whitewashed version of America that people want to paint.
Yeah.
Some
And
people.
and what do you think about the sentiment that America could be different for different people?
Can you Can you explain it?
So if I'm living in Houston
Hmm.
in Second Ward,
Yeah.
and I was raised there, my family was raised there, that's my community. What America is in Second Ward in Houston could be different than what America is for someone living in rural Idaho because of the environment that they're living in. But there's an appreciation that they still have for America, even though the setting is different. Because of that, because of the diversity of the United States, there are different settings that you could be living in while still living in the same country.
And what's the question?
Do you think that America could be different for different people?
I think short answer is yes, but I think that's with anything.
Hmm?
I think like you went to school, right? You went to undergrad. Your experience during undergrad was different than the experience another one of your classmates may have had.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all have different experiences in the same type of setting. So being raised in Miami, my reality was very different than yours being raised in Houston. Well, Houston's a little different because it's super diverse.
No,
And
but
you would say Houston's the most
it is the
diverse.
most diverse city in America.
It is the most diversity. But so yours is a little different, but it's still like my reality, 100% Spanish all the time. You go to Miami now and you're like, man, as soon as I land, it's Spanish automatically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still America.
And that's the point I'm making.
Yeah, but it's still America and we still celebrate America, right? You go to any place in Little Havana at night tonight and they're gonna have fireworks going off, they're gonna be celebrating because people are happy to be here. There's a celebration for America.
Mm-hmm.
But just because we're speaking a different language doesn't mean that we're not American.
Yeah.
It's just like it's cultural and what, yeah.
It's cultural, but it's really interesting. And let's stick to Miami for a second because a lot of those people that are going to be in Little Havana celebrating, a lot of people would say that they have now become Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a way that they're looking at the country that some people would say, yeah, it makes sense. They're celebrating the country, but they're Republicans. Where are the Democrats that are out there celebrating the country in the same way? Would you agree with that sentiment that these people can be identified in a certain political party? So,
No, I don't. I still think that Miami's it could be leaning one way, but I still think Miami is a melting pot. There's still Democrats out there. I mean, when I was living in Miami, I was out there celebrating, and I'm a lifelong Democrat.
so you're saying that there's a mixture of
My mom's a lifelong
Republicans.
when she became a citizen.
There's a mixture of Republicans and Democrats that are still showing that patriotism in a place like Miami. The same way, you don't think that there's one side that celebrates America more than the other in
No, I
Miami.
don't. I don't think so.
And so, would you say that's different than the rest of the country in your experience going and seeing who are the people that are talking about the country and appreciating the
Yeah,
country?
and I think well, I can only speak for Texas because we traveled all over Texas. I think that a lot of our friends in these remote rural parts of Texas, there's a fear that's there for them, being vocal and being a Democrat. And you and I, when we were going on the road, we would say, if you have the courage to show up as a Democrat here, then your candidate should have courage to show up here with
Mm-hmm.
you and walk alongside you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the difference. In Miami, there's not that fear. It's kind of like being in Houston, right? You have Republicans and Democrats all kind of living together in Houston without a fear of being a Democrat. There's no when we went to different polling sites, we didn't see a fear from the Democrats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you saw candidates, you saw people for candidates with their T-shirts and everything, and that wasn't a problem. But you go to a place like Palo Pinto, and you have people that are being intimidated at the polls. You have things that are happening in these places, East Texas. Um, so I think maybe that's the difference.
But what's the connection between that and celebrating being an American publicly?
Yeah, because I think that if you celebrate, and it goes back to how the Republican Party has taken ownership of the patriotism. If I go out there with my American flag, then they're going to think I'm like them.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, no, I'm a patriot too. I'm just a Democrat.
Mm-hmm. And this is a good point. You bring up the word patriot. What is the definition of a patriot? The definition of a patriot is a person who loves their country and is ready to boldly support and defend it. That's something that should be applicable to both sides.
To everybody. Everybody that is a United States citizen should feel that way.
that they love their country and would be ready to defend it and support it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think back to 9/11 when they were asking people to join the military. And that they weren't even really asking people like that. People were volunteering
Hmm.
and joining the military. At that point, it was everybody. Yeah, everyone kind of came together during that time, and it was Republican, Democrats. It didn't matter. It was we're going to defend our country.
Yeah.
And so I think that we should, again, as Democrats, we should proudly display the flag. We should say that we love this country as much as we criticize the country too, because there's so many good things that this country has to offer.
And that's where I think some of the criticism that Democrats get could be valid. That there aren't many times that we boldly express our love for the United States the way that the Republican Party does. And that's something that we have to get better at if we want to convince people that we also love the country as well. And it doesn't have to be the same way. The way that you may express your love and the way that I may express my love will be different. However, I think at a foundational level, we have to do a better job of making sure that people know that we love the United States, that it can't be one party that owns patriotism, that owns the love for the United States.
When you're online and you see someone comment on one of your videos or one of your posts and they say, I'm a patriot, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, I start thinking, well, if you're saying that you're a patriot and then you're not saying that I'm a patriot, it means that you may have different political beliefs, which means if I'm a Democrat, then you're probably a Republican.
Yeah. And one story that I think would highlight this perfectly too is when we went to Fritch.
Yeah. And Fritch is a town in the Panhandle in Texas. We went there after the wildfires,
It was during the wildfires.
during the
Yeah,
wildfires,
so the wildfires started
on
one
a Tuesday, and we
Thursday.
were there on a Wednesday.
Yeah. So we went to Fridge. We went to a hospital. We went to a church to drop off water and just seeing what people needed. And we met a gentleman there. And you didn't want people to know that you were a candidate when you were
Hmm.
dropping things off. You're like, this is not going to be that. I want it to just be about helping people. So we were there walking around, dropped off the water, and a gentleman started talking to you. And you guys were talking for a good stretch without getting into like why are you here? Like who are you? I've never seen you before. But when you finally got there, you said, I'm a candidate, and then obviously what party? I'm a Democrat, and he was like, oh, why? Like,
Hmm.
why do you have to be that? Um, and then you want to tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, I went to him and we started having a conversation. And I just told him, once he said, why do you have to be there? I said, look, I'm coming here. Let's continue on having a conversation. You shouldn't change your perspective of who I am solely because I say I'm a Democrat. At the core, we're both Christians, so we identify with our faith, but then we're also Americans. And we were throughout the conversation, we were talking about his time in the military, how much I appreciated that. So me just identifying myself as a Democrat shouldn't take away the last 30 minutes of the conversation that we had.
And the good that you did.
Hmm.
But more of the story is the Trump thing. We got into a conversation about Donald Trump,
We did.
and he was basically saying Donald Trump is the best thing that's ever happened to America. And you asked him, okay, let's put that aside for a second. Is there anything Donald Trump could do that would make you say, he's gone a little too far?
And
And you asked him, is there anything that he could do? And this is before obviously any of the guilty verdicts, any of the stuff. And he said, no, there's nothing Donald Trump could do that's going to make me change my mind because he's a patriot like me. Those were his words, because he's a patriot like me. And you and I both looked at each other and were like, Donald Trump is a patriot. A man never served in the military, doesn't really care about people like him,
hmm
but yet they identify him as a patriot more than any Democrat.
and let's say that Trump is a patriot. Let's kind of
Yeah.
progress with that. The idea that there's nothing that he could do to make you change the way you look at him says a lot. you can have your opinion on someone, but to say there's nothing that you could do.
No, the dude's like Jesus. There's nothing wrong with him.
He was almost, it was short of saying he was perfect.
Yeah, sure.
And I think I even said, man, like you're putting him on the same level as Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. And he kind of laughed it off, but that's where I think that's the uphill battle that we're fighting is that is the idea that someone is perfect and they're putting that with patriotism. And if you criticize someone, then that's not perfect anymore.
Yeah. And that's the world that we're living in right now, which is very difficult, is the ability of being able to look at something in an objective way and being able to analyze someone and say, I may like this person, but here are their flaws. Here are some things that I don't appreciate about them. It's
Yeah.
either my way or the highway. And it's pretty relevant right now. I worked for President Biden. I'm someone that supported President Biden. But I came out and said that he had a bad debate night. There's no need for me to play stupid and act like everything went well and it was great. But I feel like it's okay for me to say that and still support someone because I'm pointing out someone having a bad night or even someone having a flaw doesn't mean that that now outweighs everything that I see in them.
Yeah.
And that's a part of our culture that we have to change because it becomes unfair and unrealistic to have these expectations of people that don't match who they are.
Yeah, and you know who else I feel kind of taps into that rubs me the wrong way? I feel like Greg Abbott taps into that here in Texas. Um, and you know how being new to Texas, it was like this Texas pride is like on a whole nother level. Y'all just love Texas.
We do.
Like love it. But which is great, love Texas. But I feel like you only talk about how good Texas is, right? And you look at Greg Abbott's tweets and it's all, Texas jobs have increased, more headquarters are coming, all the great things about Texas. But then the only bad things he points out are immigration. Texas is holding the line on immigration. We're doing what the Biden administration can't do. But yet you're not talking about the people that don't have health insurance. You're not talking about the 26,000 babies that were born to rape victims. You're not talking about how you said when you eliminated abortion that you were going to eliminate rape. You haven't done it. You're not talking about the school systems that are failing, but you have a surplus in budget. You're not talking about any of those things. All you're doing is Texas is so wonderful. And I go back to your point of that's the rosy picture of it. You're not willing to criticize it, even if it's to make it better.
How much of that is just politics and that being the nature of politics?
It's a good question. I think if I pie chart it, maybe 60% of that is politics. I think 40%, obviously, you don't want people to know, or you don't want to acknowledge the bad things. You only want to acknowledge the bad things that benefit you, like immigration.
But that's what I'm saying. Even with that 40%, that's politics.
Yeah, no, that's part of my 60.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of my 60. 60% of that is politics. I think 40 is just you're willingly not telling people the truth.
Yeah. No, it happens here a lot in the state of Texas with Greg Abbott. And it's something that even whenever we were campaigning, me pointing out the flaws that the state has is because I want the state to do better. And if we have bad leadership, that's not a good look for our state because people are suffering because of that. So the way of being able to make the state better and for it to maximize the potential that it has, and me personally, I think it has the greatest potential out of any state in the country, is by having good leadership so that people can have better lives and can have a better quality of life. But that's something that you're right. You're right. That's something that exists in our politics, and it's very difficult to crack through that whenever people are looking at it from a specific lens and they're not willing to see outside of that.
Yeah, and do you see a way out of that, or do you think that's politics is always going to be that, where politicians and the people around politicians can only highlight the good and not address the bad in public?
I think politics is always going to be politics. People are always going to try to defend their own camp. I do think we now live in a world today where there's a little bit more wiggle room. I think there's a group of people that are willing now to listen to things in a different way because I think that they're dissatisfied with both parties.
Okay.
They're just extremely frustrated. So I think there's an opportunity for an objective perspective to be well received or better received than before. But a lot of it is just politics being politics. People have a hard time people have a hard time with the concept of feeling like if I criticize this thing that I love, that it means that I don't love it. And it's something that will always exist in politics. In politics. But I mean, let's take it to relationships. Do you think that that same thing happens in relationships, or you think that we kind of look at things differently in a relationship?
That this may be a topic for a different episode, but I think that depends on the person. I think if you're someone that can't take criticism, then you interpret a criticism as being unloved or unwanted. So it really depends on the person.
That then bleeds into politics. So do you think that that's at a human level, a lot of us have that perspective that criticism means that you don't love.
Potentially. Yeah, I'm not gonna wholesale it, but potentially. It depends on the person. I think people can take if you say like if I cook, right? And you like I cooked the other day and you're like, nah, this ain't it. I could have taken that and been like, dang, he doesn't like my cooking anymore. Instead of taking the whole approach of or like looking at it in the bigger context of no, Thierry eats my food all the time. It was just this one time he's like, this ain't it.
Mhm.
But depending on how you say that, someone may feel a type of way. Um, so it really just depends on the person.
And it's a good connection with the loving the country because I think in your analogy, it will be easier for you to get to a place of Thierry likes my cooking. He just didn't like this meal. If whenever you cook well, I tell you, Gloria, this was a great meal. I appreciate it. And I stack days that way. Now, the day that I tell you I didn't like this meal, now you can maybe receive it in a different way versus me never saying I like your meal. And then the only time that I communicate my opinion is whenever I dislike it.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with the Democratic Party. If the only time that we're really explicitly expressing an opinion is whenever we dislike something that the country is doing, then it's going to be hard for people to feel like we love the country whenever there have been ample opportunities for us to express our love for the country in different ways.
Yeah. And so, what do you think Democrats should do, need to do, can do to try and change that narrative?
I mean, it's little by little, but it's coming out and appreciating the country, highlighting the things that the country is doing well, saying publicly, I love this country. This is a great country. This is why I love this country. And being able to really double down on it because the brand, as it pertains to that, does not look good right now. I mean, we've traveled the state. People have a hard time viewing Democrats and patriotism and saying, putting those two in the same sentence.
But do you think even if you're unable to change people's mind, should we still do that?
Yes,
Why?
because I think that it's important to express love for something. If we love our country, we should be expressing that.
Regardless of if that's going to change people on the Republican side's minds. Or...
Yeah, that actually isn't the point. That can then be a benefit of us doing it. But I do think that we need to do a better job of expressing love for our country.
Okay.
I do think so. I think something like even flying the American flag. Someone on TikTok said that when you fly an American flag, you know who they're voting for.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
And we've had even conversations with certain people that have said, I'm afraid to fly the American flag because I don't want to be seen as a Republican. And I have to push back and say, wait a second. Fly the American flag. If you're an American and you love being American, you want to express that by flying a flag, then you should do that. You shouldn't feel like, well, if I fly a flag, then I'm going to be put into this box. No, we need to break that box.
Yeah, and I think it would even help a little bit, right? Because if you fly the American flag and someone comes up to you and you're like, oh, you're a Republican, you'd be like, actually, no, I'm a Democrat. And then that opens a conversation or opens the door to a conversation with someone that may not think like you, but at least the common thread that you have is, I love this country.
That's right.
And at the base, that's where you guys can always default to is, we both love this country.
That's right.
And I feel like we've lost that a little bit. Before with politics, politicians would be like, we all want what's best for this country. We may just have different ways of approaching it. But now it's like, you don't love this country.
And that's something, I mean, it's a huge part. That's kind of the progression of our politics. I can't say that you love our country because then maybe I'm giving you an inch, or you can't say that I love the country because then you're giving me an inch. instead of saying we can both love our country if we display that.
Yeah.
Now we have different opinions on how the country should run, but we can both love our country. And I think we saw that in 2008 with Obama and McCain.
Mm-hmm.
But
Oh, McCain, I mean, people had their feelings about McCain, but I feel like McCain was a class act. I don't know how you felt
yeah,
about McCain.
same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. He did certain things during the campaign and defended Obama whenever he didn't have to.
I mean, now if that was Trump back then,
No way.
oh no,
Impossible.
way, impossible. He would have like doubled down on it. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I really think we've moved past what that used to be. That we were civil and we both parties love the country. We were just trying to approach things differently, and I feel like the way we are today, we only love the country. This is Republicans and Democrats. We only love the country when things go our way.
Hmm.
And so it's become a very transactional type of love. And I think I've seen that with, we can have again another conversation on the Supreme Court, but Supreme Court decisions, just lower court decisions, both sides will say, oh, it's a great day for America when this happens. It's a really sad day for America when this happens, and you disagree with them, and you call, the Republicans will be like, oh, the liberal courts, da da da. Then we'll say the conservative courts, and it's very transactional. We can only express our love when it's going our way, instead of loving it throughout, and that's just what comes with living in a country like this.
Hmm. Any final thoughts?
No, what do you got? Final thoughts?
No, I don't. This is a good conversation. I think the idea of patriotism and it not just being reserved for a select group of people is something that needs to be talked about more.
We should. And I maybe one final thought. There was an event that took place, and you're gonna have to help me out here. Representative Somalian,
Ilhan Omar?
yes. People on the internet were killing her because she had an event that was 90% Somalian.
Mm-hmm.
They were flying Somalian flags, speaking Somalian, and people were like, "What kind of shit is this? This is America. Not one American flag was being flown. If this is what you want, then you need to leave this country, deport her immediately." Blah 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 blah. That bothers me
Good, tell me what.
because I feel like her culture, her heritage is Somalian. And so if she has a very specific event for her constituents, I think it's okay because it's like we talk about language access, right? That's the language that they feel comfortable with. That's how she can express what's happening, get them to buy into certain things. That doesn't make it less American.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know your thoughts on that. If you've seen it or
Yeah, I saw it a little bit. I don't have the full context, but I saw some of the pushback that she got. And so I want to be careful about what I say, specifically to that case. But I do think with certain people, and she may fit in this, she may not fit in this, but with certain people, people are going to have an issue with them whenever it seems like the only time you talk about the country is with criticism.
Mm-hmm.
That you're never big up in the country. You're never celebrating the country. The only time that we hear you talk about the United States is whenever we hear you bashing it. And or whenever we hear you say that you think somewhere else is better than here. And so back to the analogy about cooking, if all you ever hear me do is talk about how bad your cooking is or how bad the meal is, you're not going to think that I like your cooking.
Yeah. So let me kind of reframe the question
Yeah.
is remove her, this example. Do you accept the criticism that you don't love this country if it's a Cameroonian event that's only in French and only the Cameroonian flag is being flown?
I don't accept the criticism if the language is only in French. I do think that I need to be mindful of what flags are being flown at the event.
Okay.
I do think that's something that I need to be mindful of
Why?
because I think that you end up now putting yourself in a position where people on the outside are seeing it and are saying, well, they're only flying the Cameroonian flag. Why aren't they also flying the American flag? I think that those optics are important because you're sending messages. There are messages that you're sending, and so I think it's important for people to feel like, okay, the Cameroonian flag may be flown, but there's also an American flag being flown at the event too.
Okay.
And somebody could make the argument, why are you even flying a flag at the event? Just don't have a flag at the event if you're not going to also fly the American flag at the event. So it's not a deal breaker for me. Right? I didn't have the same reaction as other people did. But again, when you start adding things together, I can understand. Maybe I don't agree with it, but I can understand why people ended up having a frustration with that, the way that you're framing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to be incredibly mindful of the messages that we're sending, some of those verbally, some of those nonverbal, to make sure that it's clear what we're trying to say. Anything else here?
Mm-mm.
So, July 4th, we're probably going to have some barbecue later today.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on patriotism?
Mm-mm.
Not saying that you're not a patriot if you don't eat barbecue,
No, there's not saying that. There's not a patriot food.
but in the Chenko household, we eat barbecue.
We eat barbecue at any time. Doesn't have to
That's
be
right.
4th of July.
That's what I'm saying. That we eat barbecue. So July 4th is a day that we will eat barbecue
Like any other day.
like any other day.
Yeah.
We actually had barbecue 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
2 days ago. So we're not 1 day barbecue fans.
No.
Yeah. Let's go. So if y'all eat barbecue, go eat barbecue today. Go support a business. Ideally, a local business.
Ideally.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Appreciate it. See y'all soon.